Welcome back. The polls have closed on India's marathon election process and the country is now awaiting a result to be declared on Saturday. No party is expected to win a clear majority, and as exit poll numbers begin coming in, political leaders are now working on alliances in the formation of a coalition government. With me discussing the issues at hand is Riz Khan, Senior Fellow at the World Policy Institute and the author of Planet India, The Turbulent Rise of the Largest Democracy in the Future of Our World. And in Washington, Dan Twining, Senior Fellow for Asia at the German Marshall Fund, and he previously served as a member of the State Department policy planning staff responsible for South Asia. Miro, just before the break, we were talking about Pakistan, the effect of having, Pakistan, of course, as a neighbor and the long-running conflict, and the attacks in Mumbai in November last year. To what extent do you think those attacks had any kind of bearing on the way people were voting in India?
I think they had very little impact at all. I think that's probably surprising to listeners around the world because the attacks were such a big televised event that I think most of the world is aware of. But in India, people were really focused on bread and butter issues, and the level of the debate between the parties, even in terms of wooing the electorate, came down to almost these kind of laughable offers of, say, free television sets or free cell phones to all poor families, continued reduced rates on electricity for poor farmers. These parties were really courting the poor voter. It's the poor in India who vote, much more than the wealthy or the urban middle class that's received a lot of international attention. And that's really what the election was about in terms of issues discussed. It wasn't climate change, it wasn't terrorism, it wasn't some of the things, some of the really big issues that in fact India is facing.
It's interesting, Daniel. It's true. The economy is obviously every country is looking at the way the global economic crisis is taking hold. But I wonder to what extent politicians, and certainly the opposition politicians, were able to capitalize on the current global economic downturn with regards to the way India's economy is going. And I wonder if they used it as an opportunity to be able to slap down the government on its handling of the country's finances.
You might expect that. It's been a little more complicated, partly because, as Mira said, a lot of the campaign issues at stake were really kind of bread and butter local issues. A lot of issues related to farmers. 70% of India is still rural. We forget that. A lot of us abroad are focused on the new rising urban India. Most India is still rural, still poor. This government is also a bit of a paradox. Manmohan Singh, as finance minister, who's been the prime minister for 5 years, Manmohan Singh led India's liberalization in the 90s, but his government over the last 5 years has not been able to move ahead on any meaningful economic reforms. India in the current financial crisis has been buffeted less than many other countries, partly because it's a much more protected economy. Indians have taken some comfort in this. I might say it's false comfort. India would have grown a lot more in the last 15 years if it hadn't been such a protected economy. It's also got a very high fiscal deficit now, which is going to make it much harder for whoever wins this election to move forward and kind of balance the books in India going forward.
Mira, I know certainly in the past when I've been in India covering the elections, the issue of corruption has been a big one, very much highlighted in the media. And it seems certainly in more recent years there was more accountability being demanded. To what extent did that manifest itself in this round of voting?
Oh, well, with what's going on right now in back rooms across the country and in Delhi, the horse trading that's going on, I think corruption is the furthest, at least, from the politicians' minds. I don't think it was a big issue. I think really Indian voters are so resigned to it, and while there have been demands for more accountability, a lot of talk of e-governance and things like that to make the whole process more transparent to the citizenry so that they can know what their elected officials are up to. And there were some independent candidacies in this election that were interesting. There was the Mira Sanyal candidacy in South Bombay, which had record low voter turnout. One of India's wealthiest voting districts, but she ran as an independent, saying, look, all the parties are hopelessly corrupt and hopelessly parochial, and we really need hands-on action. You had Shashi Tharoor, the former Undersecretary General of the United Nations, running from his home state, Malika Sarabhai running in Gujarat also as an independent in her case. So there were these kind of small efforts, but I think overall, I think most Indians are just kind of resigned to it. It's very, very rampant.
Daniel, the issue of America and America paying attention to what's going on right now. I know I've read a couple of your articles where you talk about America has failed to really capitalize on the potential relationship with India. To what extent are you seeing anything with the Obama administration that might show any sign of change in the way America approaches India? I mean,
part of this, we should give the Obama administration a bit of the benefit of the doubt. They've been in office for only a bit over 100 days. However, there has been a bit of a concern that while the Bush administration dehyphenated India and Pakistan and worked with India to build this new relationship, the Obama administration, in hyphenating Afghanistan with Pakistan, has kind of left India on the side. I think a lot of Americans think that India is really the big prize of the region, the country with which we can do most in the world together. Countries like Afghanistan and Pakistan are tough, and they're on the U.S. agenda because they're problems rather than that because they can be partners in promoting positive solutions. Richard Holbrooke, in testimony just today on the Hill, was very careful to say we're going to wait for India's elections before we go to India to talk about next steps in Afghanistan and Pakistan. So the administration is being quite sensitive to the Indian elections, but I would say my hope, at least personally, is that they will do much more reaching out to New Delhi, because India certainly can be part of a solution in Afghanistan in particular.
I want to put an email to you, Mira, if I may, that came in from Ottawa in Canada. Sunny wrote in saying, India's best leaders have been senior politicians, while the most anticipated and the most disappointing have been fresh young neophytes. Prime Ministers Narasimha Rao and Manmohan Singh were credited with the economic boom that is still continuing. The next leader of India needs to be wise and experienced and mentor the young politicians and India. Now, I wonder, I mean, experience apart, to what extent is India lacking charismatic politicians nowadays? I mean, to what extent are voters swamped with essentially a mediocre batch?
Yeah, I mean, they do have, I mean, both the main parties have put forward extremely wise leaders, even aged leaders, Manmohan Singh, you know, and Advani, both being in their 70s. The sort of leader, next generation in waiting on the Congress side would be Rahul Gandhi, who is very much of a neophyte and an unproven, but part of the political dynasty there. And then on the BJP side would be Narendra Modi, who's currently Chief Minister of the state of Gujarat, but he has his own baggage in terms of issues in his own state, including the massacres of Muslims that took place there in 2002. And there's kind of a gap, I think, a real gap of politicians that are neither sort of, you know, senior citizens, nor wet behind the ears, nor so mired in a regional situation that it's hard for them to have a national vision. I think that's really the problem.
Daniel, to what degree have the major parties, the two major parties, certainly Congress and BJP, tried to redefine themselves, modernize themselves, and rework their image?
They've tried to do that. This has been hard for both parties for different reasons. It's been hard for the Congress party because Congress is basically a dynastic party, and we've seen that in the family structure, starting with the first Prime Minister of India, Jawaharlal Nehru, leading all the way, as Mira Kamdar said, to Rahul Gandhi, maybe even Priyanka Gandhi, the next generation of Congress leadership. On the BJP side, this intergenerational challenge and new leadership question has been torn in part by tensions within the party between the economic modernist wing of the party and the kind of Hindu nationalist wing of the party. So both parties, actually, this is quite interesting, they're both transitioning to possibly a different sort of brand. And this election, it'll be curious to see whether it sheds light on the future direction of either one going forward, or whether it sort of raises more questions than it answers.
Mira, a thought with a minute to go. To what extent do you think, or how vulnerable do you believe India to be when it comes to the prospect of social divisions along racial and religious lines, certainly religious lines, leading to perhaps radicalization and social unrest?
Well, you know, I think one indicator of that will be what the results are, the actual results are of this election. You know, you had Varun Gandhi, part of that dynasty, but the kind of black sheep part of that dynasty now over on the BJP side, who made very incendiary anti-Muslim remarks and was thrown in jail at one point for them. And you know, that specter has certainly been attempted to be raised by some of the right-wing Hindu nationalist you know, actors, but I'm really not sure if that's really the division that is the most important. I think it's the wealth gap. I think the real problem for India is the division between haves and have-nots, those who have really benefited from globalization and economic liberalization, those who haven't.
Yeah, well, I'm going to have to stop you there, and thank you very much for your contribution. Daniel, to you too, thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
On the next show, US President Barack Obama prepares a visit by Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. We'll have a look at that. Join us for that.